Welcome to the More to the Story podcast. I'm so glad that you have come along. This is going to be a great show. I'm excited to talk to our guest today, and I'll introduce him to you in just a minute. But first, I want you to know that this podcast comes to you from Wesley Biblical Seminary, where we are developing trusted leaders for faithful churches. And we have just had a surge of growth. We have more students than we've ever had before. Actually, at this point, we have more active students than we have alumni in our 50-year history. It's an amazing thing because we're trying to serve a variety of denominations, not just denominations, even like groups that are outside of the kind of existing denominations. But with the emergence of the Global Methodist Church, we have a host of students who've come to us through that church and then that movement that's happening across the world. So anyways, if you're interested in a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, or if you're just looking to get a little bit more training than what you get at kind of the Sunday school level, we have lay initiatives that we'd love for you to think about. So you can find out more about us at wbs.edu. Secondly, my friend Bill Roberts helps sponsor this podcast. He's a financial planner who comes at that discipline from a Christian perspective, and he helps people, particularly people who are in ministry who aren't probably thinking about their retirement very well, to come alongside of them and help them plan for their retirement. So you can find out more about him at williamhroberts.com. There's a link in my show notes. And if you sign up for my email list at andymillerthird.com, I'll send you a free tool called 5 Steps to Deeper Teaching and Preaching. It's a video-based resource that has like a worksheet that you can work through to exegete scripture more faithfully, but also with the aim of creative engagement with the people God's called you to serve. And you'll find some other things on my website, andymillerthird.com, a new course on the afterlife meant for Sunday school classes and small groups with video discussion and discussion guides, a video lectures, and then also a course on heaven, something you might, I have heaven and afterlife, and then I have Jude, my course on the 25 verses of Jude. I'd love for you to check that out at andymillerthird.com. All right. I am glad to welcome into the podcast Ted Kluck, who's a writer and is a journalism professor at Union University. Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Andy, great to be here, man. Just looking at your office there, sweet office.
Okay.
You want to tell me about the weird dolls there over your right shoulder?
Oh,
Do you get
well,
asked this a lot? Is that
the very first guest who's ever asked me about that? What a privilege. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is John and Charles Wesley.
Sure,
So
of course.
we're in the Methodist tradition. So actually, they just fell over there. Charles Wesley, if you press his thumb, it'll play. And can it be? But don't worry. I know you might be more in the Reform camp. You have Martin Luther as well.
Attaboy. There we go.
And then behind me on the other side is John Wesley again.
Yeah.
So
Great, man.
Well, thanks for asking. And I'll tell you, okay, I'm just going to go right into it. Like with the first time I saw the name Ted Kluck.
Sure.
I was at I think it was a Borders bookstore, which, you don't find these type of bookstores very much. I was in downtown Chicago. It was snowing. It's about Christmas time. And I was looking in the Christian section and I found this book and it said, Why We're Not Emergent. And at this point in my life, I was maybe finishing up in seminary, and it was like the emergent movement, Brian McLaren and the like, was like, not just like this. It wasn't treated like a new worldview or theology or system. It was like, oh, well, this is just the next technique that you need to have to be able to be an effective pastor. And all this stuff was coming in. I was cautious. It didn't feel right to me. The concept of truth were being challenged, and it just felt funny. And it wasn't, as I'll say, as clearly heretical at that point. Like in my mind now, I feel like it's gone in such a different direction. But then I got this book by you and Kevin DeYoung, and I read half of it in the bookstore. I was like, these guys are speaking my language. It's like, This is exactly what I was. And it was like, I don't know if you are as cool looking as you were on the front of that cover, but it's like, here's 2 cool looking guys. Like, tell me about that book. Like that was part of, and you were already functioning as a writer before then, but what was it that led to that book?
Well, I'm not cool looking at all, as evidenced by the video that accompanies this podcast. But dude, that was a magical little scene you painted for me there. The winter in Chicago, the Borders bookstore, the light snow falling. Did you like grab for the book and a woman grab for it at the same time? And you've now been married for 15 years. Was that?
I need to add that. And I had a nice hot cup of hot chocolate or something, right?
It's like the first act of a rom-com. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So that book was my 4th book, actually. So I had written three secular market sports books before that. I was doing some writing for ESPN in the early 2000s, and that kind of opened the doors to some book writing in the sports realm for me. So I'd done a book about Mike Tyson. I did a book about pro football, a book about college football, but I had this experience where, I've always had long glasses or long hair and weird glasses.
Okay.
So I think kids have always thought that I'm kind of more liberal than I actually am. I'm actually very boring and conservative, but I had this experience, and I was still young then. I was probably around 30. And these college kids from my church would give me books to read by like Brian McLaren and Rob Bell, thinking that I would vibe with them, So I
Yeah,
would,
sure.
trying to be a good friend, I would read the books. I would underline everything that I thought sounded wrong and
Yeah.
give them to my friend Kevin DeYoung, who was our pastor at the time. And I would just say, look, I'm not a theologian. This seems weird to me. Am I on the right track? And he would invariably hand them back and say, yes, that's all like rank heresy. You're definitely on the right track. So eventually we kind of kicked around this idea of a book where I would do a bunch of fun kind of journalistic stuff, and he would do more hard theology, and we would come at this thing and do kind of a corrective on it. And at the time, I didn't even have a literary agent. I was
Okay.
unagented still, and we kind of pitched it around, and Moody Press took a flyer on it. And I guess the rest is history. My career
Yeah.
took off like a rocket ship. KDY has kind of remained unknown, but I'm kidding. He's a
Yeah.
main stager. He's a reformed superstar, this guy.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and you both moved on, probably moved from that position, like where you guys were. I mean, you described some of what, thinking back to that book, what led to it. You were in the where is it, Lansing area,
Yeah.
right? I mean, now tell us about like some of your experience. You talked about sports books. You had
Yeah.
written sports books. You have a career or a past in sports.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was always an athlete. I was always a football player, and I thought that would be my life. I thought I would coach and just be in football, but the Lord had other plans. I had some pretty serious injuries my senior year of high school. It kind of resulted in me going to this small Christian college to play football called Taylor University.
Oh yeah.
Got injured again there. Met a lovely young lady who was very cute and very 90s, and she was a big reader writer type, and I let her read some of my writing, and she encouraged me in that realm. She has been my wife of 27 years, so shout out my wife Kristen,
Okay.
KK. But yeah, she was really the impetus into, maybe you can change your persona, maybe you can think a little bit more broadly than sports. And as God's providence would have it, he's allowed me to stay in football pretty much my whole life. I've been coaching and playing and stuff pretty
Okay.
much nonstop since then. But yeah, my first book was about Mike Tyson, the boxer. So I got a chance to travel around the country and interview a bunch of guys that had fought Mike Tyson, which was really, really fun. I was still a young kid. I wasn't even 30. Was kind of wide-eyed. I grew up in a cornfield in the Midwest. So like going to all these cities and gyms and, different
Yeah.
places to interview these guys that I'd seen on TV was really kind of a wild experience and a lot of fun. I would say to this day, that book is probably still my favorite. It's my favorite one to like pull off the shelf and read. I think, I did an adoption memoir about adopting my boys from Ukraine. That's probably my favorite book for kind of personal reasons.
Right.
But yeah, love the Tyson book. Then I did a memoir about a season that I spent playing arena football, and then met Kevin and did Why We're Not Emergent. And that kind of opened up this whole world of writing where I could include scripture and talk about the Lord and make much of him. And that became it, man. That became my career. And it's still going to this day by God's grace. And I've loved it.
So there's not been much in the like journalistic world that combines these two areas of faith and football, or faith and
Yeah.
sports, or like a faithful approach to sports. I mean, we used
Yeah.
to have this magazine. I would get anything I could. Now, I was never a college athlete. I was a homeschool athlete. How about that?
Attaboy.
Does that count?
There we go. What we play? What give
I
me
play a
30
little
seconds on that.
basketball. A little
Okay.
basketball. My boys are following in my tradition as being homeschool basketball stars, if there's such a
Attaboy.
thing.
Were you
So
give me your NBA comp? Were you a point guard? Are you dishing? Are
yeah,
you taking the ball and scoring? What's your deal
Isaiah
there?
Thomas. Isaiah
Okay.
Thomas,
Ooh.
the greatest traditional point guard ever.
Okay. Now this is an interesting conversation. I do
Now, do
love
you agree
Isaiah
with me?
Thomas. Yeah, I
You,
do. I think I do, and I'm very fond of that era of the NBA. I think it was much more interesting. and I know I sound like an old guy, but I met a lot of those bad boys Pistons when I was doing ESPN stuff in the early 2000s in Detroit, and got to meet a bunch of those guys. It was pretty cool.
Well,
Yeah.
and I even love the early 2000s Pistons teams. I'm
Oh,
still
fun team. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
great defense, Ben Wallace, Chauncey Billups,
A
Richard
real
Hamilton.
team concept there. You know what I mean? There was no sort of traditional NBA star on those teams, and yet the whole thing worked, pretty flawlessly. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I remember at the end of one of the finals games, Rip Hamilton said something like, Chauncey Billups took the last shot and he made it. And he said, well, he's our best player, and so we just need to give him the ball. And I thought, best player? I didn't know there was. Oh, he's the best player. Yeah, that's right. Because it was such a team-oriented, had such team-oriented focus, like with, Rasheed Wallace and those sort of people. So it was a great, but back to Bad Boys. This is the debate I often have, and I go to the mat on it. I'll say Magic Johnson's maybe the greatest point guard, but not a traditional point guard. He didn't do the same sort of things. Maybe John Stockton. But I lived in Bloomington, Indiana for 5 years.
Oh man, yeah.
So that's part of why I identify with the movie Hoosiers.
Oh, I love Hoosiers. Yeah,
Bob
I love
Knight. It's my favorite movie of all time. And
dude, so
yeah, go ahead.
Did Bob Knight dying recently move the emotional needle for you?
It did.
Yeah, talk about that.
It's man, I feel like I'm on a psychologist couch.
Yeah. Get on the Chase Lounge and swipe your HSA card on the way out. I'm doing therapy.
Not only that, it was tough. The documentary that came out where Neil Reed exposed some of those challenges with Bob Knight, and like seeing that video and seeing that whole context, it certainly changed my perspective. I still can appreciate the direct, authoritative approach, but I don't like where it led him. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's
he seemed rather tormented in it. You know what I mean? And the older you get, and I'm sure you've experienced this, the more you walk with the Lord, the more you experience these narratives through the lens of like, gosh, that person just needs Christ. I remember thinking that about Mike Tyson. He was so eloquent and so guilty and so good at kind of articulating his sin struggles, and yet the idea of a redeemer seemed very foreign to him. And I just remember even early on thinking, man, Mike really needs Christ.
That's right. And I struggle. You kind of want to make them your heroes into Christians when they're not. And I should say, like, Bob Knight, likely he was not walking with Jesus. Like, there were people my dad actually witnessed to him, and my dad ran the Salvation Army in Bloomington, Indiana, and prayed with him. But it was I know that the gospel had its shot at Bob Knight, and I know the Salvation Army brought him a Thanksgiving basket when he was a boy, and it definitely touched him. But nevertheless, like, back to like this idea of like what was going on in the kind of the 90s, and like thinking about these various movements within Christianity, thinking of Christian athletes. There was this magazine called Sports Spectrum.
Yeah, I used to write for it.
Oh, did you? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Like, and there was a probably still going on today. I just don't see it. It's not marketed towards me, like teen Bibles. There was a sports Bible, and I remember opening up the sports Bible, and they had Joe Dumars, a Piston player I love. But then there was Hulk Hogan, with somebody over his head, and it didn't quite fit. It didn't quite, and there's a lot of this, like, how these things come together, journalism and communicating to people about like Christian experiences. And I think that that's what's unique about what you're able to do, is like you have these experiences in sports, and at the same time, like you're gifted as a writer and trying to bring these things together. So that was, I think, what drew me to Why We're Not Emergent, because there also is a subtitle, By Two Guys Who Should Be, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about that. I want
to get back to Tyson too.
Yeah, I want to get back to the 90s kind of selling Christianity and sports thing, which I'm very conflicted about, and I think is very weird. But By Two Guys Who Should Be, sort of the energy behind that was this emergent church, which is really just liberal theology and MTV clothes. I mean, let's be honest, it was nothing new under the sun. It was just kind of sexily packaged by Christian publishing labels. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
sure.
like these labels that you had trusted to put out solid books. We're just kind of cash cowing it by, publishing Rob Bell and Brad McLaren and all these guys. So the Two Guys Who Should Be thing it was really resonating with, like, for lack of a better term, white, educated, affluent, suburban kids who were just bored and ready to rebel. And that should have been us, two guys who had grown up in Christian homes. We should have kind of fallen for it, but by God's grace, we didn't. And it just kind of became a fun subtitle. But I want to go back to the sports spectrum thing.
Okay, gotcha.
I think it's always weird and I've been a part of some of these projects. To my shame, I've ghostwritten, a number of them, where, like, an athlete will say something about the Lord, and then Christian publishing will immediately jump on it and, like, throw X thousands of dollars at this person for a book deal. I mean, the greatest example of this is Tebow, right?
Yeah.
Did you happen to catch the Florida, like, the Swamp Kings Tebow documentaries on Netflix?
No, but I saw your article.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I should see it. Actually, your article made me think I need to go see that.
You should watch it. It was really bizarre. And you remember going through the Tebow stuff in the early mid 2000s, and, like, just evangelicals worshiping this kid and, like, treating him like Jesus. And the outcomes, the range of outcomes with Tebow being he might be president of the United States, he might actually be the Messiah. If you talk to some real hardcore dispies, like, yeah, he may be the second coming, and there was just this Tebow mania. And I spent a day with him. I was almost his ghostwriter, which would have been just buckets of cash raining on my head. That would have been amazing. But it would have been a very bad project for me, like, cynicism wise at the time. So I'm glad it didn't work out. But it's just strange to me, Andy, how it's very much like the human heart for us to want to pin our worship on something physical. You know what I mean? We want to hang it on a person.
Yes.
I mean, we have Christ, we have Scripture, we have the church, we have all these, like, beautiful ways to worship, and yet part of this industry that we're both kind of in is wanting to hang it on a person, which always didn't sit well with me, and it made me feel weird. And I'm actually, like, a smidge ashamed of some of these, like, ghostwriting projects that I've been a part of with that. But I just wondered what your thoughts were on all that.
No, I thought your article, and I just encourage people to go. I love how World News Group has you writing for World Opinions.
Yeah.
Like, I think it provides a little different slice for them. And I saw that article on Tim Tebow, and I resonated with it because I think this is what you get, Ted, that I like, is that we had, maybe because I see some of myself and the things you did, not being a football player, but understanding, like, there's, like, this Christian culture that's a part of who we are. It's an evangelical culture, which often finds its identity in what it's not, but yet theologically, I certainly, like, subscribe to the tenets of it. And there are good things that culture did for me, like maintain, like, I had a purity ring, and, like, I saved myself from marriage. And I imagine that I listened to DC Talks. I don't want your sex for now. And that was a pretty good thing. I listened to all of I had a WWJD bracelet. Yeah. Now there were some, like, things about that culture that we've heard now, a purity culture. It's not so good, but nevertheless, like, that evangelical world was pretty good for me. But at the same time, it has such excesses and such extremes that you get on this, like, the Tebow moment is a key part of that. And you described it really well in your article. You're like, well, is he going to be president? Is he going to be Messiah? Well, it turns out you walk into Hobby Lobby, and there is his ghost written book next to mints and a variety of other things while you're buying Thanksgiving decorations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was a kid who had a few years in the pros, tried baseball, did some underwear ads. He ended up not being the Messiah, which is fine, like, all of which to say he was kind of a normal dude in his 20s trying to figure it out. And that was probably the right outcome, for all of us. But really strange moment, and strange to, like, look back on my career and realize I've kind of been with some of these moments, and some of these people over the years. And I mean, the reason for me writing about sports from a Christian perspective is just that sports has had such a grip on my own heart for so long. It's been a lifelong project trying to figure it out, and trying to figure out for the Christian, what place does it occupy in my heart? What place should it occupy in my heart? How do I do this in as Christian a way as possible? and it has implications for how I've tried to parent my kids and how I treat my wife in it. And I just think it's a really important thing for those of us who are in sports to try to get right, you know?
Yes. What is that place? I mean, like I've come around to it more now, having I have a 16 and 14-year-old boys, I have a 12-year-old daughter, but
Mhm.
I've definitely think part of my role as a father, and grew up in a tradition like where we had our teams
Sure.
and played sports and kept in shape, but
Sure.
you there's like a role in my fathering that is also acclimating them to sports.
Yeah.
And I think like there's a is it just so they'll be like me, so they'll understand it, or is it also something deeper, like they're the things that sports teaches us to live for a goal, to have
Yeah.
discipline. I think that's some of what's at it for me. I mean, you've written about this, like putting sports in its proper place. Give us a little summary of like what you think that proper place of sports can be.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, we admire it, right? So you watch some old Isaiah Thomas tape and it like stirs something in your spirit. You know what I mean? You love the courage, the creativity. I feel the same way when I watch like Walter Payton or,
Yeah.
Mike Singletary or some of my favorite, guys from my childhood, and it stirs something, right? You admire it. And so it's natural to want to share that with our kids. But I see so many sports parents and even Christian sports parents just making an idol out of it. And
Yes.
I did that myself, right? I'll be the first to admit I was a psycho with it, dude. And that was not good. There was a lot of conviction. A lot of it like very helpfully came from my wife,
Okay.
who is not an athlete and not a sports person and didn't understand it. So we always kind of had this push pull in our marriage of some things starting in a good place for me. Like one was my oldest son had like mad athletic ability and still does,
Okay.
and he's an amazing guy. We're dear friends. We're thick as thieves to this day. By God's grace, I didn't ruin football for him, though I
Okay.
probably tried to, and it's turned out to be this rich thing that the Lord's allowed us to experience together, but not without a lot of mistakes along the way by me and me just elevating it to a place that it should not have been,
Mhm, mhm.
and but for the godly rebukes of, my wife and just conviction of the spirit, I think I could have really ruined that for him and I could have really done damage to our relationship. And I'm really grateful that the Lord didn't allow that to happen,
Mm,
And so I think being somebody who's experienced sports at kind of a higher level and yet felt that conviction of, ooh, I'm giving this too big of a place in my heart. I think it's kind of given me a unique perspective on maybe writing about it in ways that can be funny and self-deprecating and self-indicting, but also cautionary, if that makes sense.
yeah, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying there. Like there's a cautionary piece at play. And my wife came from a family that didn't emphasize sports, and
Yeah,
so when I then wanted to, when you're newly married, watch 7 hours of football every Sunday, there was
yeah,
something that needed to change.
yeah,
And like I'm like, oh, this does have a place of prominence. And I'm not saying that necessarily came from my family. It's just,
sure.
and it sounds like you're a Bears fan, as am I.
Yeah, so my parents are from Chicago.
Oh,
And so that was kind of my like on ramp into loving the Bears. And then I was in fourth grade when they went to the Super Bowl. So that was just a magical time. It's when you're old enough to like you're a sentient being and you know what's going on and all that stuff, but it's still sort of magical and ethereal to you. You're not so old that it's lost its magic. So yeah, that was just an amazing time, man. And what an
yeah,
amazing team. So many personalities. That was back when NFL players had personalities and they were actually kind of interesting people. And the
yeah.
coaches were interesting people. And the Bears kind of being this like dumpster fire of an organization always. They had this like little moment in the early and mid 80s where they were good, and that was a lot of fun to be a part of. And now they're back to being a dumpster fire or
That's
whatever.
right. Well,
Yeah.
we're working for those draft picks this year, or we'll
That's
see what.
always the narrative, isn't it? We're working for the
That's right.
draft picks, Eberflus will probably be gone, but hey,
Yeah.
um what did you think of Bajent, this kind of
Oh,
scrappy undrafted quarterback that took over for a few games? Did you enjoy
you
that
want them to
narrative?
make it.
You do. Yeah.
Who doesn't want, and of course you won't be surprised by everything I've already said that, okay, so Hoosiers is my favorite movie. Then Rockies are close second through eighth.
Classics,
right?
all of them. Yeah.
So who doesn't want to have the kid who's been in Division II come in and
yeah, that's right.
I would love it if he was like a little bit better. Like it's probably not going to work. Like he probably has a good future as a backup quarterback for the next 5 years. But I loved him, man. And I love, but I have a lot of effect. I'm a Big Ten guy, and I've lived in SEC country for a long time. I have my order within the Big Ten that I root for, but I'll end up rooting for Ohio State whenever they make the championship, even though it might be my last team in the Big Ten.
Sure.
So I love Justin Fields. Like I want him to be good. I want him to be, right. And he has such amazing athletic ability. It just doesn't seem to be connecting and with wins.
Dude, so let's do 30 seconds on this. All-time favorite Chicago Bears, like players. Are you like an Urlacher guy, or who are your favorite Bears of all time?
Oh man, I'm gonna the first thing that came to mind, I'm gonna say Richard Dent.
There you go. Yeah, the sack man, number 95. He was awesome.
How about you?
Peyton, Singletary. I was an Otis Wilson guy back in the day. I wore 55 because he wore 55. I thought he was really cool coming off the edge there, and just kind of a cool looking dude, looked great in the uniform. Wilbur Marshall was a favorite. Like getting more modern. Of course, Urlacher, Lance Briggs, enjoyed those guys.
Oh, that's a great period.
Yeah, all
not
the
Rex Grossman, man.
Rex Grossman, that was an interesting thing because, like, if you look at the Rex Grossman experience, I mean, has there ever been kind of a worse starting quarterback in a Super Bowl? You know, I mean, we're looking at we're looking at guys like Gus Frerotte there and Trent Dilfer, and I think Grossman was probably arguably the worst starting quarterback in Super Bowl history.
Yeah, I think you're right. Oh, that was so tough. And so I'm just flexing my all my sports connections. When I was leading the Salvation Army in Tampa for 5 years before I came to Wesley Biblical Seminary, I became close with Tony and Lauren Dungy.
Okay.
And it was always a kind of a tough part when I'd be in conversation with tough moment when we actually talk about our teams, and I'd be like, yeah, you beat my team in the Super Bowl. Like that was tough, even though I would rub in the Hester thing that he somehow kicked the ball to Devin Hester.
How do you do that? You know, that's unconscionable. But
so he always, there's a story there. He would never tell me that story.
Dude,
but,
when you were in Tampa, did you ever meet Mike Allstott?
You know, he was involved on the other side of the bay in St. Pete with a Christian school. He coaches Christian school that I had friends who were in that school, but no, I didn't ever meet him.
Dude, he was an all-time favorite of mine too.
Oh,
great,
man.
Big fullback, neck roll guy. Loved Allstott.
Yeah. I mean, I could go back at the Bear, you know, I just saw a clip the other day celebrating Curtis Conway's touchdown pass. So yeah, I was totally into those teams, some of those teams that only won 1 or 2 games.
Yeah, those fun, crappy, like late 90s, early 2000s Bear teams that were, kind of a disaster, but they always had like 1 or 2 fun players. You had late career Brian Cox was in there in the late 90s.
That's
you had Curtis Conway, Raymond Harris, Jim Miller.
Rashawn Salam.
Yeah, Rashawn Salam. You know, great for 1 year.
Great. I fumbled the ball so much. Okay.
Curtis Enos. Yeah.
Oh,
all right,
Curtis
we could do this all day.
Yeah. This is so much fun for me. I might be losing people, so I want to go back to Tyson. That says people probably will be more engaged with that. All right.
Sure.
I'm a couple of years younger than you. I didn't quite get to experience the 85 Bears, but only in memory. But at the same time, tried to watch all that I could. But that period was a period too of Tyson. Like this is a period. Every kid, I mean, everybody knew on my playground. Everybody knew what had happened. Like how many seconds it took him to knock out each person. Sure. And now as I look at it, I'm like, now in an age of Fury, Wilder, and these type of people, you think about Tyson being this short guy and having this amazing story, but it was just this dominating force. What was it? What did you learn from people who had faced him?
Yeah, I learned a lot, obviously. And growing up in the 80s, it was kind of this heady admixture of, you had the Rocky movies kind of popping off at a big level. Right. Rocky IV, which is a terrible movie, but so much fun to watch, came out in 1985. It's like an 88-minute music video. Yes. I think they were doing a lot of coke in the mid 80s, but so you had Rocky IV, you had Tyson hitting the scene, and boxing is really a sport that rises and falls on its star power, right? So you had Muhammad Ali in the 70s, and then kind of a lull or a valley, and then Tyson hit the scene in the mid 80s, and he was this charismatic guy. He talked funny, but he was really articulate, and he was short and small, but he moved his head like a middleweight. Like he fought like a small fighter in a lot of ways. So he
Yeah.
was incredibly hard to hit. He was impeccably trained. They kept him busy, and he was quick, right? So the guys that fought him will tell you it wasn't even so much the power, which was considerable, it was the speed. Like you
Hmm.
didn't see the punches coming. He was hard to lay a glove on. And in the aggregate, it just made him unbeatable for about 5 years. You know, he was really, really tough to fight and tough to beat. And tall fighters even had trouble with him. And it really wasn't until Customato died and he parted ways with Kevin Rooney that the wheels started to come off for Mike, and the training kind of went away. And then he just became another small heavyweight. And you know, of course, everybody knows the rest. But yeah, fascinating book, fascinating guy. I could talk to those guys forever. I mean, they're all
Did
very
you talk to
interesting.
Buster Douglas? I'm sorry, I haven't seen the book. Did you
Yeah,
get?
no, I didn't. I didn't get Buster because he was working on his own book project at the time. So I
Okay.
didn't get to interview Buster, but I interviewed Evander Holyfield at his
Okay.
mansion in Atlanta. He you know, brought me into his office and showed me all the kind of dirty ways that he bullied Mike Tyson in that fight. And it was awesome. The chunk of his ear was still out. It was hard not to look at it. And
Yeah, sure.
but he carried no hard feelings. He just said, "Hey, it's a hurt business, you know. It's
Wow.
a fight. These things happen." So you know, he was super pragmatic about it and cool. So yeah, they were great. Lennox Lewis, Holyfield, Tyrell Biggs was one of my favorites from that book. Buster Mathis Jr. We got to talk to
What
a
did
lot of.
Diggs say that was interesting to you? Like what caught you off guard with Diggs, or like you didn't
Well,
expect?
he was interesting because he was a 1984 Olympic heavyweight gold medalist and looked like Muhammad Ali. You know, he
Hmm.
was tall, had the high top fade, great looking dude. I actually had to go to Philly twice to interview him because the first time I flew out, he stood me up.
Oh wow.
And he had like in his adulthood documented cocaine problems and all this stuff. And I think the years had in some ways financially not been kind, but he called me after standing me up and he was like, "I really want to do the interview. Will you come out again?" And
Hmm.
I kind of mulled it over and I decided to drive out. So I drove like 11 hours through the sleet from Lansing to Philly. And I was pulling into Philly. He said, "Meet me on the corner of 57th and Haverford at 11 p.m. You know, it's when I get off work." And so I drive into this neighborhood where like it's dark and there's trash blowing around, and
Wow.
it was definitely like out of my comfort zone, and it could have really gone sideways, right? I mean, this guy could have done whatever he wanted to me and you know, absconded with whatever, but instead, you know, he folds himself into my tiny little car, and we end up driving around Philly all night just talking, telling stories, and we ended up in this all night Chinese place.
Hmm.
And I asked him a pretty standard question. You know, I was like, what would you have done if you hadn't been a fighter? And he grabbed my notebook and my pen and he started to draw, and he drew me like a cartoon Fred Flintstone with boxing gloves. And
Okay.
he slid it across the table. It was really good. And he goes, "Ted, I wanted to be an artist. I always wanted to be an artist." And I thought that
Oh,
was so sweet. And that was emblematic of like why you want to be a journalist. You know what I mean? You just get to connect with people and hear their stories and then try to honor their stories. And I just ended up really liking him, you know,
yeah.
and it was a real genuine connection. So yeah, the book is full of moments like that. And it's
Wow.
it's creative nonfiction. It's me doing a lot of scene work and a lot of sensory stuff and just trying to do justice to these guys' stories.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
All right, I tell you my other interaction with one of your books. This one was not with Kevin DeYoung,
Hmm.
so I'm gonna put it on the screen. I
Yeah.
did a doctorate of ministry at SMU Perkins School of Theology,
Okay.
which most of the people in my classes would not call themselves evangelical. And I
Sure.
was in a classroom one time where I was the only person affirming the resurrection. So
Yeah.
it
Wow.
was a good environment. I went to Asbury University, Asbury Theological Seminary, conservative evangelical
Sure.
Wesleyan school. So it was good for me. It was good for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
but this was one of my textbooks, Brian
Yeah.
McLean's kind of Summa, a
Wow.
new kind of Christianity. But I became aware of another book,
Yeah.
kind of Christianity. So here's what I did. This is my method.
Yeah.
I'll put up on the screen together. So one's by
Yeah.
Kluck, and so I would walk into class and I would have them together,
Oh,
but I
that's
would have
outstanding.
yours on top.
That's outstanding.
So
Now,
this is
did you ever get any pushback, or did you get chirped by anybody in your class for doing this?
oh, sometimes I would just say things and they would just be quiet. They just couldn't quite
Yeah.
take it.
I
But
can't believe they assigned Brian McLaren in like a real like
know it.
theological program of study. That's kind of amazing to me.
Well, that's part of what happens in more liberal environments is
Yeah,
if you're trying, and also that was in a situation where they're trying to help people in ministry. It wasn't
sure,
as much of an as like trying to have a practical focus and like this
sure.
is the way to do that. Like
Yeah, yeah,
this is, I think, the tail end of what he
yeah.
was trying to do. And they brought him in, and he spoke to a few classes and that kind of thing. But I appreciate like the title pretty much says it all. But
Yeah,
anyways, it's a generous, fair, organic, free range guide to authentic realness. I mean, these are
yeah.
this is the type of language that was being
Oh my
described.
gosh, yeah. That language was proliferating back then, and scanned even in the moment as like very cheesy and sort of it was going to timestamp the era for sure. So yeah, that little book, Kind of Christianity, was a satire that my business partner Zachary Bartles and I cooked up. We have a little publishing concern, a company called Gut Check Press. We do a podcast called the Gut Check Podcast that people can check out. And yeah, we've done satires, we've done essay collections. We did a series of end times rapture novels. We did 2 of these.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So originally the project was called Beauty and the Mark of the Beast, right? And this was kind of an homage to / satire of the Tim LaHaye, Jerry Jenkins end
Yeah.
times novels that were such kind of fun, hot garbage. And so we had a Tebow figure in our Rapture satire. We had like a Jack Van Impe type character. It was a lot of fun, dude.
I love it.
So if you're up for some fictional ha-has, you should check that out.
Oh, I love, yeah, those are just kind of fun things. Like, and again, what it did for me, it was like kind of, I'm in the middle of this culture, and this is the evangelical marketplace that is putting itself like in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing's true. You mentioned earlier about Rob Bell and Brian McLaren being mainstreamed or headlined.
Yeah.
In that period. Well, now, I mean, the same thing can be true. I was just at the American Association of Religion, Society of Biblical Literature. And when you walk around, you see the various booths, it's just various forms of critical theory. And it's like everything you can imagine, just putting that lens on all scholarly efforts too. So I feel like many of the major publishers are doing similar things now. I was in a situation like when about when your Kind of Christianity, this satire came out, my denomination asked me to be a part of a task force for saving young adults. Like they're just like leaving the church. So what can we do?
Sure.
What kind of intervention can we do? And there was a couple of people who were older in that group. And we went around the table and we were all going to describe like who we were and what we were bringing to the group. And the 2 people, they were probably in their 50s or 60s. They said, well, I'm really concerned about the church, but I just had the one of the authors in that period was Phyllis Tickle. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I remember Phyllis Tickle.
She said, Phyllis Tickle said to me, she said that I'm emergent. So I'm proud to say I'm emergent.
Wow.
And then the guy said, and I found out too, I'm emergent too. And it came to be the actual young adult at the time. I don't know if I'd be so now, but like the actual adult. And I said, my name's Andy Miller. And I am proud to not be emergent.
That's funny. Yeah.
So this is what yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was weird, man. And it was weirdly marketed in that there was a like marketing to young people aspect of it, but there was also like a breathing life into old, dead, liberal mainline denominations aspect of it, where like all of a sudden, your 55-year-old lady who's in an old, dead, liberal mainline denomination would read Brian McLaren and kind of resonate with it and go, oh, we're already doing like contemplative prayer walks where we're praying to nature or whatever. And it's like, now he's blessing that practice. And it was weird, man. It was definitely like a nice, I say nice, there was nothing good about it, but it was a nice marketing moment for the industry where they kind of pitted our camp against their camp. And I think it was good for business for everybody, if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting. It's like a chaos. Now, somewhere there, you and Kevin also came up with the book, which I found really helpful too, Why We Love the Church and Praise of
Yeah.
Institutions, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in like your perspective on that too. Like, so you had the one piece is like identifying like what's going on in this evangelical subculture and then
Yeah.
theologically analyzing it. But then the other side is like, what are we trying to do? It's not just about deconstructing, but like,
Yeah.
what's the reconstructive, refortifying effort? So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that book.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do something positive, right? We had kind of done the negative take with Why We're Not Emergent, and we wanted to, yeah, just celebrate church life, and just kind of reaffirm that your Christianity doesn't take place in a vacuum. This was kind of like this would have been like phase 2 of the internet, but like phase 1 of social media, and there was this big sort of I can watch sermons online movement, and my faith is really personal. I love Jesus but not the church. I mean, all that stuff was kind of
Yeah.
sexy back then. And yeah, we wanted to double down on, yeah, church life is rich. Local church life, it's not perfect. And there are things about our own churches that we find funny, but for the most part, I mean, this is a gift. This is a rich thing, and I want to spend my life being a man of the church. I want to invest there, and I want to listen there, and I want to learn there, and worship and bear one another's burdens. And we just wanted to celebrate some of that stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
I think that's really encouraging when people get into the real nitty gritty of what really is happening in life, and like kind of the messiness that can be with churches, and in the internet age when you can have these really appealing, polished public speakers with lights and smoke machines and different
Yeah.
different angles, it can feel like, man, I'm missing something, but
Yes.
actually probably where you are is something richer if you could just see it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think growing up evangelical, tell me if you resonate with this. I always was wary of anyone like overtly trying to tug at my heartstrings. So
Mm.
where you would go to the Christian youth conference or whatever, and the lights would go down and the smoke machines would come up, and I don't know, some guy would be like tinkling a piano, and like I never liked moments that were calibrated to elicit some kind of reaction. So like genuine worship, genuine biblical expositional verse by verse preaching has always kind of resonated with me just because it seems so real,
Hmm.
and I do think it's the best way to spend our time, right? I've got a finite number of days on the planet, and I want to spend them learning the whole counsel of Scripture. And
Yeah.
I want to be in churches that encourage me to do that. I want to be in churches that show me my own sin, but also show me the Redeemer.
Yeah.
And that was the energy behind the book.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I think I hit that target. So what happened after you and Kevin are both in Lansing, but now you're in Jackson, Tennessee, Union
Yeah.
University. Tell us about what happened in the meantime.
Well, we kind of both embarked on solo careers, and we each started doing books on our own, mostly Christian books. I had a couple of secular books mixed in there still, I think, some football things, and I did a book on professional wrestling, which my wife insists was going to be a career killer and the worst project I ever did, and she was right,
Okay.
as she often is. I enjoyed the project, but yeah, we were doing solo stuff, and eventually I went to graduate school later in life. Like I didn't enjoy college. I didn't enjoy undergrad at all. I was super bored and kind of indifferent toward the whole thing. But I loved writing. I'd started adjuncting even with a bachelor's. I found this community college that would let me adjunct, and I was teaching like freshman comp essentially to guys who had just gotten out of prison or just come back from the military or whatever. It was a rough crowd,
Sure.
but I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved teaching writing, and I loved the energy of the classroom. So I decided kind of later in life to go back for the MFA, thinking I would hate it, but I loved it. So I got my
Mm.
my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction, and embarked on trying to get a teaching job, a full-time faculty job at a college, and quickly learned that, despite all the books on my resume, the fact that some of them were Christian really disqualified me from most jobs. In fact, I had
Mm.
a very kind thesis advisor in this secular, MFA program who, despite me being a Christian, he really liked me, and I really liked him. And I asked him, I said, knowing what you know about my resume, do I have a snowball's chance of getting hired by an English department in a secular school? And he's like, I think the world of you as a writer and as a teacher, but he's like, no, you don't, you know? So I was like, okay, that's tough to hear. But then when Union came calling, they were in need of a journalism professor. I'd spoken there kind of touring after one of the books. Kevin and I spoke at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, which is where I'm teaching now. I'd never heard of it, never heard of the town, flew in there for a night, but I kind of stayed friends with one of the guys who works there, who was our handler for that weekend. And he indicated that they needed a journalism prof. I went down and interviewed, and the Lord just worked it out. You know, I've been there 9 years. I absolutely love it, Andy. It's rich. The discipleship is rich. The school is still Christian, which is kind of remarkable for Christian colleges circa 2023. I'm really proud of that. We've done some incredible things in our journalism program. For a school the size of ours, we're a really small school. We've won Best Magazine of the South 4 or 5 times since I've been there, Best Feature Writer of the South, against huge schools. So we're competing against kind of all of the SEC, all the like directional schools in the South, and doing some great things at Union. So check us out at uu.edu/apply. There's a little plug, and come study some journalism with me. I would love it.
Yeah, it's great. Well, and check out your, various things you've written. I'll say that I didn't know you were writing for, maybe this was your first article with them. I didn't until just a couple of months ago, but you had an article on Aaron Rodgers and kind of the when he got hurt. And maybe that'd be a good way, maybe the last thing we could talk about here, and then maybe one more question after that. But like that kind of frames what you're trying to do. Like, I think that article is a good description of this whole picture of your story and where you've been leading. It's trying to put things in their proper perspective. And there's somebody who likely would have gladly gone to Rob Bell's church, and he had a friendship with Rob Bell. And
Rob actually helped deconstruct Aaron Rodgers, which is unspeakably sad if you think about it. Yeah, it's a very sad thing.
Yeah. And so tell us about that article, like what you're trying to do there.
Yeah, so I mean, like the rest of America, I was watching football one evening, and it was Aaron Rodgers' debut with the New York Jets. So much ballyhooed, coming off Hard Knocks, which was basically like a 6-episode commercial for Rodgers, and there was a lot of hype around this, right? And I had kind of always been interested in Rodgers because I knew he had a background in the church and in faith, and had kind of, Rob Belled his way out of the evangelical church and into kind of, amorphous, I don't know, spiritual, not Christian kind of deconstruction per the Rob Bell orthodoxy. And so, but I also like him, like whenever I catch him on Pat McAfee, I'm like, oh, I like this guy. I like Rodgers, Let
me just say, I'll interrupt you. I'm planning to use your verb form, Rob Belled, in the future. Okay, keep going. Pat McAfee.
Feel free to use it. So I'm watching this and I'm going, I like Rodgers. I kind of want to see it work out. And then 3 plays into it, he tears his Achilles. And I turned to my wife, who was on the sofa with me doing something else and not caring about it. I was like, this is Shakespearean. I just said, this is Shakespearean. There's something deeper going on here with Rodgers. And so you look at events like that in a person's life, and you go, again, through the lens of Christianity, you go, I hope this softens him. I hope this takes the hard heart and softens it. I don't know that it has, but that was certainly my thought and my hope at the time. And Rodgers seems to have doubled down on like, I'm going to shock the world. I'm getting, I don't know, whatever, like bull's blood injected into my Achilles, and I'm gonna, yeah, right. I'm gonna heal 30% faster than any human has ever healed from this injury, which is, it should be exciting, but it's kind of boring, like it's kind of boring that he's like that. But anyway, that was my impetus. And I think this is what all practitioners of creative nonfiction seek to do, right? So a thing happens in the world, and it happens to be something that I find interesting. So like, call it the Rodgers injury. And then I think about that thing, and then I think about my experiences, and then I think about what it might say about people or about the world in general. And then that's where the essay comes from, right? And so you're writing about a thing that happened to Rodgers, but also this stuff that's happened to me. And I'm trying to invite the audience into that somehow. Yeah. I think that's how a magical essay or column like that can happen.
Oh, I love that. That's a great, you throw scripture in there and then you have a good sermon. That's a great
Sure.
way to think about preaching.
Yeah.
Is how we're bringing together in preaching. Like you have a text, you have an occasion, you
Mhm.
have a congregation,
Yeah.
and you like trying to have all these things come together. So
Sure.
that's a great tip. People in my preaching classes, go back and listen to that 45 seconds from Ted, and you're going to get some good clues there. All right. So the name of my podcast is More to Story.
Yeah.
And I say that for a theological emphasis in our tradition, like we emphasize the role of God's Holy Spirit at work in our life and experiencing sanctifying grace. So like more than just being forgiven, but also
Yes,
I
that's
like
right.
having there's more to the story of Ted. Like now
Mhm.
you have a lot of thoughts published. So you have a lot, there might not be much out there, but is there something you don't talk about very much? So like something that maybe like I'm a Ted Kluck fan.
Oh, I
Is there
appreciate it.
something I don't know? Is there more
Well,
to
I
the
don't
story
know,
of
man.
Ted?
That's interesting. I have a couple things. I have a movie in post-production, so I wrote an independent film called Silver Dome. It's a
Oh,
feature-length film. I made it with a dear friend of mine named Glenn, who is a punter at Kentucky and then played in the NFL for a number of years and is now an actor. Our lead actress was Carmen Serrano from an AMC show called Breaking Bad from a few years ago. And we crewed this thing up. We shot it in the old Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit before they tore it down, former
wow.
home of Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons,
Right.
for a few years. So yeah, I got to shoot a movie there. We're in post-production, kind of navigating the peaks and valleys of independent films and budgets and different creative approaches to things. But we're almost done with Silverdome. By God's grace, we'll have a finished product here, before too long, and that'll be a lot of fun. So that's something that maybe a lot of people don't know.
That's good.
And another thing that people might not know, I'm still playing football,
Oh yeah.
and I'm 47. This is not a good life choice, Andy. It's really unwise. But I get to play in one semi-pro game every year with my son. So my son's a stud. He's 21 now. He's like 6 foot, 235, fullback, linebacker. He's like all stop. He's just a
Hey.
machine. And to suit up with your kid in a real game that's a bucket list deal, dude. I've been able to do it now. I think this year was my fourth time that I've done it. And
Wow.
I broke some ribs. So I rebroke some ribs that I had broken playing in France like 12 years ago. So yeah, so rebroke some ribs. I'm in a little bit of pain right now, so I'm playing through pain on this program. And
Oh, bless
I want you to
you.
know that's the kind of commitment that I have
That's right. We had
be
to
here.
reschedule this interview for that, but we did it. That
Yeah.
injury.
Thank you.
Let
Thank
me
you.
ask. I was going to do this. I didn't. Okay, let's just go through you asked me some fun sports questions.
Sure.
So, top three football players all
Top three
time.
football players all time. For me, Peyton, Walter Payton, that is, Dick Butkus, former Bears middle linebacker. And third would probably be, I want to do an offensive lineman because O linemen don't get enough credit. Probably
Big
Anthony
Cat Williams.
Munoz. What's
Oh,
that?
there you go. Big Cat Williams.
Oh, Big Cat Williams. Yeah, legend, Chicago Bears legend. Not quite at the level of Anthony Munoz, but pretty amazing player in his own right, for sure. Former defensive lineman turned offensive lineman, Big Cat.
There you go.
So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. All right. How about basketball? Top three basketball all time.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with, I don't know, some interesting guys that I liked, but obviously Apex Mountain is Jordan. I got
Yes.
to interview Jordan at the very end of his career when he was with Washington. So he was playing
Wow.
in Detroit at the Palace of Auburn Hills, and NBA locker rooms are well, the NBA is interesting in that you do the interviews before the game, right? So unlike the NFL where you do them after, in the NBA you get some time to interview guys before the game. So the home locker room at the Palace is palatial, right? Like thick carpet and flat screen TVs and luxury. But the visitors locker room is like an 8th grade public school basketball locker room, like metal clangy lockers and like wood benches. And so that's where I met Jordan, and he was wearing like $5,000 worth of suit and earrings. And Jordan's like 99th percentile good looking. I mean, he's just a kind of magnificent human. So I don't get starstruck often, but I was pretty starstruck interviewing Michael Jordan. That was kind of wild. So Jordan would be number one for me. Let's
Now
see.
it's a real question. Number 2 and 3. That's it.
Yeah, 2 and 3. I'm just gonna go with guys that I like. I really liked Ben Wallace. I thought the Ben Wallace
Okay.
experience was really fun. he had a great physique. He was super strong and didn't say anything, but like was really physical, got a lot of rebounds. Ben Wallace was great. And I feel like I got, what's that?
You're just doing that for me.
I'm doing that for you, but I'm doing it for me too, because it's true for me. And I gotta go with Larry Bird.
Larry Bird, yes.
Dude, Larry Bird was unbelievable. Indiana guy like myself, you know, Hall of Fame, like smack talker, great shooter, played a whole game left-handed just because he was bored. I love Larry Bird. I mean, what's not to love? The guy was amazing.
That's, so would but you're definitely like Jordan, but LeBron, would he be in your top 5?
Here's my thing about
go tell me your LeBron theory.
Here's my LeBron theory, okay? And it has to do with social media, and it has to do with like life in the modern digital age. LeBron, magnificent athlete. I mean, unbelievable basketball player. You know, it's unassailable what he's been able to do, right? But I think he's a gradations more boring public figure. You know what I mean? He lacks the Jordan charisma. And we could litigate whether Jordan was a good person. I think he probably wasn't, right?
Right.
I mean, by all accounts, he was kind of a reprehensible person, but like he had charisma, which is different than being a good person. You know what I mean? So charisma means you're in the arena and you have the option to like look at all these different things and all these different stimuli, but you're looking at Jordan just because he's there. And LeBron lacks that. And that's not a shot at him. It's just certain people have it, certain people don't. So like LeBron to me is an exceptional basketball player, but a bad basketball star, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Whereas Jordan was a great basketball star.
Yeah.
Larry Bird, great basketball star. Magic Johnson, basketball star. In his own way, Isaiah Thomas, even though he was a little prickly and kind of divisive, he was a great basketball star. You know, good-looking guy, was from Chicago. Like it all kind of lined up there. And so that would be my take on LeBron. And I think, Andy, something else has happened in the digital age, which is unfettered round-the-clock access to these athletes and images of the athletes and video of the athletes has rendered all of them boring because we have no scarcity. You know what I mean? Like the great thing about being a Bears fan in the 80s was you could only see Jim McMahon for 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon. Right. Whereas if Jim McMahon happened in 2023, I don't know, he'd be getting canceled on Twitter. He'd be saying the wrong stuff. Like people would be tired of him. But you got him once a week, you know? And I think the NBA was similar with Jordan, where when you saw him, it was a really special thing. And it would be less special if, like, I don't know, he was tweeting 16 times a day or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good word. Like, I think that's a helpful piece because your imagination was a part of the experience. Like now, like it's hard for me because Isaiah Thomas has some sort of like cannabis company and like,
I know.
Man,
it's depressing.
Like I don't want to, or whoever it is, like, you know, most of them, like I think there's something about like the way that we imagine who they are, and so that all has changed. Ted, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that I had a chance to talk to you. I hope I get to meet you face to face in person, sometimes shake your hand.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your writing and kind of hitting this milieu that we share so many different things in it. And I hope other people will get a hold of your writing after this. Tell people where they can find your stuff.
Well, I'm not on social media due to being an old man and due to being not good on social media. I wasn't good online. I'm not good there. A lot of sin for me. So no social media, but they can find my writing at, you mentioned World News Group. So WNG.org, just look up Ted Kluck or Google Ted Kluck World. This little online scrappy bookseller, Amazon.com. You can find my work there.
That's right.
We've got a real nice little handshake agreement where they get a cut, I get a cut. It works out for everybody.
I've got a few of those too.
Yeah, that's kind of it. Gut Check Press. They can check me out there. My little publishing concern. Check out the podcast. I have a podcast called Kluck, just my last name, Kluck, where we talk about the kind of things that you and I have talked about today. So books, culture, movies, music, whatever strikes our fancy. So those are a few places they can check me out.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming, Ted.
Man, thank you for having me.